Okay, welcome to the panel discussion on Jamaica's economic recovery, Jamaica Rising and Building Back Better, as part of the Explore Do Business Jamaica Investment Conference. I am Keith Collister, Executive Chairman of the ATL Pension Fund. Joining me on this discussion as we explore investing in Jamaica's agro-industry is Mr. John Mahfood, who is President of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association and Managing Director of Jamaica Teas Limited. John comes to the table as an experienced business leader with a wealth of knowledge on local and international retail and trade, mergers and expansion. He also has several years of service on the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association's Board of Directors through his appointments as Vice President and Committee Co-Chair for Membership and MSME Program Development. We are also joined by Wayne Henry, who is Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Mr. Henry, or Dr. Henry, has a PhD. He spent 5 years as Vice President of Government Affairs of the Scotiabank Group and was formerly a Chief Technical Advisor to the Minister of Finance, as well as Special Advisor to the Minister of Agriculture. He had also previously worked as the World Bank representative in Jamaica and spent several years as a lecturer in economics at the University of the West Indies. So we have two experts today joining us. On that note, I just want to start with the overview of the session. Jamaica experienced record and consistent economic growth rates pre-COVID in certain sectors. The recovery effort by the government has been extensive, in some regards positive, and there is currently a recovery going on from the pandemic, particularly in outsourcing, manufacturing, agriculture, and the creative industries. In fact, Jamaica showed quite a strong growth rate in the second quarter of 12.9%, which included recovery in both services and goods producing industries. The services sector, which includes hotels, increased by 14%, and the goods producing sector, which dominated by construction, agriculture, and manufacturing, grew by 7.8%. As a result of this, unemployment has fallen significantly to 8.5% from 12.6% last July. In this session, we seek to give some insight into the past performance of the economy, the current economic situation, and provide a bold vision for Jamaica's future. So at this point, I would like to ask Dr. Wayne Henry to follow up on that brief overview of the Jamaican economy, to give us a sort of update of where we've been coming from and where we are now, and some thoughts on the future as it is the Planning Institute of Jamaica that he represents.
So thank you very much for having me, Keith, and hello everyone. And so Jamaica has made tremendous strides pre-COVID in macroeconomic stability over the last 10 years in improving the macroeconomic environment. These improvements were underpinned, we think, by an aggressive fiscal consolidation program supported by some of our multilateral partners and underpinned by legislative reforms to secure the benefits of the program. And so, for example, we had fiscal rules established that led to a reduction in Jamaica's debt to GDP from some 135% in 2013 to just under 95% in 2019. The improved fiscal performance facilitated up to 2019 7 consecutive years of economic growth, 8 consecutive years of increased employment, and 9 consecutive years of single-digit inflation. And so these gains place Jamaica in a better position to address the health and economic shocks caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and the public health and safety measures implemented to stem its spread. And so while looking at the impact of the pandemic, most macroeconomic conditions would have worsened. Like many other countries globally, Jamaica was hard hit by the pandemic. And for the calendar year 2020, real GDP contracted by 7.5%, though contraction continued into the first quarter of 2021. And we had for fiscal year 2020-2021 a contraction in the economy of some 11%. But then for the April to June 2021 quarter, the effects of the fiscal and monetary measures implemented to cushion the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were beginning to see positive signs in terms of payoff. And so the country recorded economic growth of 14.2% following that June quarter. And it is poised to grow for the remainder of 2021. And so the relatively strong and fast return to growth is mainly attributed to the reforms that started within the last decade for Jamaica and place the country on a sound footing as we seek to build forward stronger and better. And while the situation remains fluid, we are poised to return to pre-COVID levels of GDP by fiscal year 2023-24 and pre-COVID levels of employment by fiscal year 2022-2023. All right, thank you.
Okay, John, well, turning to you, maybe you can give us a quick overview of how you see things at a more micro level in terms of growth and in employment in Jamaica at this time.
Thank you. I think people, first of all, would know that Jamaica has a relatively low vaccination rate. Yet, and I think it's about 20% at this time, with 13% fully vaccinated. However, the government has done a very good job of managing the infection rate. They're putting controls that a number of other countries don't have, including the US, of mask wearing, social distancing, and this has helped to temper the spread of the virus. So even with the low vaccination rate, Jamaica has been spared a lot of the problems associated with COVID. And during the past year and 9 months or so, we have had some surges, but through controls, including curfews and certain lockdown days, we have managed that process, which has allowed the country to return to a form of normality. Also, Jamaica is not overly dependent on one industry. We are obviously a tourist destination, and that took a very hard hit due to COVID, with virtually all hotels closed. But at the same time, it also has the pillars of agriculture and manufacturing and call centers and a very strong remittance base. And in fact, the remittance base increased to compensate somewhat for the downturn in tourism. And of course, we also have a very strong US dollar, what we call it, the cushion there, the reserves of almost 4 billion. So we have been able to pull through this problem of COVID, and as Dr. Henry said, we are now beginning to see the benefits in terms of growth and so on, not yet to the pre-COVID level. But what has happened as of 2021 and late 2020 is because of the good fiscal management. There is a lot of money in the hands of investors that are looking still for opportunities to invest. And so we have had a very, very strong stock market with a lot of IPOs going on in 2021. We have had a very strong construction industry as people look to put their funds in other areas because bank interest rates are very low. And of course, the call centers have continued to do well. So going back to the construction industry, we also have Jamaicans living abroad looking for an opportunity to invest in their money. And a lot of our construction boom has been facilitated by inputs, by funds coming in from Jamaicans living abroad. This has allowed the manufacturing sector to continue and to build, and we can talk about some of the areas where we have seen opportunities, including increasing in exports. So to summarize, because of the fiscal prudence that Dr. Henry talked about for the past decade, and also the good controls concerning the management of the COVID in Jamaica and the healthy economic environment that exists, we are seeing Jamaica come out of the pre-pandemic level. And it looks like this will continue well into next year.
Okay, thank you very much, John, for that those opening remarks. Wayne, I'll come back to you. Can you give us a sort of overview of, for example, things such as the current account deficit and the performance of the tourism industry, which has recovered, and when do you see us returning to full employment and GDP? So the elimination of the output gap, as you would call it.
So thank you for that, Keith. So to be clear, when I say full employment, I've said, and we're careful to quantify, pre-COVID, we saw record unemployment, low unemployment in Jamaica, and record, job creation levels, 2015, 16, 17, 18. So we saw some impressive numbers there. We would speak of returning to those pre-COVID levels, and particularly the pre-COVID level of employment by fiscal year next year, fiscal year 2022-23, and for pre-COVID GDP, real GDP levels at fiscal year 23-24. Full employment now as a paradigm, we would have to have further analysis. For persons, there was some discussion around when we had the record low unemployment levels, were we at full employment? And we say, well, to speak to full employment, you're now speaking to, and I speak to an output gap, you're having to make assumptions about capacity in the economy, what levels of utilization are, what is the potential of the economy, potential GDP. So I'm just wanting to make clear that we were speaking now to pre-COVID, returning to pre-COVID levels of GDP and employment. And it's a useful assessment because when we look at comparing to another crisis, for example, the 2008 crisis, the economic and financial crisis of 2008 to about 2012, we saw at that time that it took Jamaica maybe 8 years to return to pre-crisis levels of output of employment, and maybe closer to maybe from 2018, maybe almost 10 years to return to pre-COVID, pre-crisis levels of GDP. So the shorter time, and in comparing crises that you say in 2008, we lost some 91,000 jobs over that 4-year period as the global economy went into recession. In COVID over last year, the first case in March 2020 for Jamaica, in that maybe a 4-month period, we lost 135,000 jobs. So for us to recover to the pre-COVID level of employment in a much shorter time compared to a previous crisis says that the economy was in a better place. So the engine, this vehicle of the economy was in better shape, right? So just to speak to those issues and those areas that would lead recovery, and we've seen leading recovery, would be those sectors that were most severely impacted. So largely tourism, construction, other services that spoke to entertainment, restaurants, the construction industry, transport, storage, and communication. Those areas that would have been severely impacted by the limited people movement, the closure of borders, and that those industries are leading and have been showing some very impressive numbers in leading the recovery.
Okay, well, I'll come back to John. Are there any particular sectors that you like particularly to invest in now, whether they are, and particularly real sectors such as manufacturing or agriculture or logistics? How do you see things? And perhaps you could expand a bit on also the development of the stock market here, which I know you're an investor in. And, you know.
Yes, thanks, Keith. You know, Jamaica, like every other country, has been impacted by the turmoil in the shipping industry and the shortages that have been caused by the surge in demand by consumers in the US. And this has manifested itself in significant increases in lumber prices, in steel prices, in cardboard and paper, and in raw materials. In addition to that, it has impacted us in terms of shipping costs. Typically, a container would cost $2,000 from the Far East. A year and a half ago, that's now roughly to Jamaica about $12,000 to $13,000. The combination of those two things have caused a spike in our inflation rate, again, like many other countries. The couple areas of differences, though, is that you know, we are a central port for shipping, and for that reason and others, our shipping costs, the increase in our shipping costs is far less than the increase in shipping costs to the east coast of the US. So we are seeing 20-foot containers costing up to 20,000 US to the US and Florida. And that difference between the shipping cost to Jamaica and the difference in that and the US shipping costs, I don't know how long it will last, but that $7,000 or $8,000 difference has created a window for Jamaican manufacturers to export products that prior to this might not have been competitive compared to the Far East manufacturers. And we are seeing some examples of that with furniture companies, bedding companies now exporting their goods to Trinidad and Barbados. Whereas, you know, they couldn't compete in the past. We ourselves, as a company, are moving some manufacturing that we used to do in the Far East. We're bringing it back to Jamaica and exporting to the US. So we don't know exactly how long this situation is going to last, but for the time being, the companies in Jamaica are gearing up to take advantage of it. And I believe as they do that, it will have a longer lasting impact in terms of the efficiency of the manufacturers. And we have also seen, as any investor in the stock market in Jamaica will see, is that even though the pandemic has caused a cut in consumer demand and in the hotel sectors, companies have reinvested in technology and increased efficiency, and now are making more profits from less income. And this will bode well for the future when the economy slowly starts to build up. So I like manufacturing as a good area for investment. And we have to remember that the proximity to the US makes it, with freight rates from Jamaica to the US, $1,500 makes it an attractive area now compared to the Far East. We are seeing other areas, Keith. We're seeing a growth in the BPO sector, significant growth. Again, because of the nearness of Jamaica to the main markets, to the English-speaking population, to the relatively good education, creates an opportunity for that BPO sector. And you know, we want to start to think about areas like the cannabis and the marijuana as opportunities, because it may be a couple of years, but slowly I think the US federal government is going to start to look at this area as more and more states open up. And Jamaica is beginning to expand its capacity in that industry. And I think finally, the housing sector, which I talked about, and which is still having a strong demand from overseas and local in the price range of under 30 million Jamaican, which is how much, Keith, in US? That's about what, 400,000, somewhere in that region. That price range of construction still is very attractive in Jamaica. And I think those are some of the opportunities that I see moving forward, and that will continue to be good areas for investment.
Okay, thank you, John. Coming back to you, Wayne. You just want to give us a little bit of an overview on the current account deficit and balance of payments.
Okay, so we've seen, and you'll hear, I think, on the current account side, balance of payments, some of what BOJ would be monitoring and reporting on quite frequently. Some, you know, with the inflation targeting regime, there have been, you know, methods and I think just greater focus on this overall platform of stability and ensuring that is maintained in the monetary sector. We and as John spoke about, those confidence in the economy, I think the overall fiscal on the fiscal side, the macro stability has been an key underpinning, I think, for what we've seen of the country going into the pandemic, and even what we think will underpin a lot of the recovery going forward. So the point, Keith, is that, you know, policy matters. We've seen the government engaging in you know, prudent fiscal management before the pandemic, and I think with you know, some wise choices that allowed a buffer of resources. You think that would have enabled some of the responses during the time of the pandemic. So when we think of the CARE program, the COVID allocation of resources for employees, you think of the SERVE, the Social and Economic Recovery and Vaccine Program for Jamaica, those programs that were geared towards mitigating the impact of the pandemic on persons, preserving livelihoods, trying to shelter and provide for the more vulnerable. I think that came about as a result of a number of measures that led to general macroeconomic stability and some overall fiscal prudence. And I think it's very important. And those will serve as key underpinnings going forward for a lot of what the private sector would need to thrive in terms of stability and predictability. And I think because of what we say policy matters, and where Jamaica is in a much better place in terms of macroeconomic stability, in terms of a stronger place in terms of fiscal stability and the fiscal prudence that has underpinned, enshrined by legislative underpinnings that in terms of fiscal rules and fiscal laws, that and now to be established a fiscal council that sort of ensures greater predictability and stability in the fiscal and overall macroeconomic framework. And that is, I think, coupled with a lot of what we're seeing from the central bank side in terms of in a more, I think, transparent, independent framework, but no less committed to the same stability underpinned by an inflation targeting regime, where they are very much in a systematic way reporting on interventions on the management of rates and interventions into the economy by the central bank. So I think overall messaging, Keith, is that you have a more predictable and stable framework going forward.
Yes, well, isn't it true, Wayne, that we have we're targeting a balanced budget this year, and we have a very low current account deficit. So that's where we've got for an emerging market, we have an unusually strong macroeconomic framework. All right, John. So going back to you, you were a member of the recent business and consumer confidence indexes of the Chamber of Commerce. You were a speaker. Obviously, it was down slightly. Primarily, it seems due to the rise of the Delta variant over the period. But how do you see things now that we seem to be moving into a period where the Delta and COVID is coming back under control, and we've moved away from the full lockdowns, and now we're open 7 days a week again? How do you see business activity, particularly over this coming quarter?
The fact is that like virtually every other country, where the business people and consumers are faced with this long period of restrictions caused by COVID, and for the likelihood that it is going to continue for the foreseeable future, it does create some apprehension in terms of business folks. And on top of that, Jamaica started to see, probably a little later than other countries, started to see the impact of the inflation caused by the matters that I mentioned before. So, I think that was what was really driving the downturn, is the number one, the continuation of restrictions and the high inflation rate. It is my sense, and Dr. Henry can say if he thinks it's true. It is my sense that the inflation push that we are feeling will stabilize sometime next year. And we will get back within the low single digits that we had been anticipating. And the other thing that we have to look forward to is the resumption of a very strong tourism industry for the coming winter tourist season, where the hotels are reporting very strong bookings. And of course, we are also getting additional passenger service. So I think the tourism industry is coming back because our tourists, the persons from the US, the UK, have a high rate of vaccination. They feel safer traveling. They feel safer traveling to this side of the world, which is very peaceful. And our tourism workers are very highly vaccinated as opposed to the regular population. So the tourist industry is going to grow, I believe, not just through the tourism arrivals, but through the sector itself. And investment in the sector creates opportunities. And John probably will talk more about some significant investments in that area. My reading from all of that is that going into 2022, 2023, we are going to see a resumption of the economy continuing to grow at a rapid rate. And as Dr. Henry indicated, sometime around early 2023, we're going to get back the levels of employment that we had previously. And the economy and the manufacturing sector, because they are now operating at an increased level of efficiency, will be more profitable. And that will continue to grow the Jamaican economy and provide opportunities for investment.
If I can, Keith, I just support John's assessment on inflation, that yes, we believe that the increased levels you're seeing now would be temporal, relatively short-lived, in keeping with the BOJ's own assessment that their projections remain in the 4 to 6% range, even as they were explaining that that increase that we are seeing now, that would be tempered to return back within that sort of what they call their target range, their program range over the medium term. So they're supporting what John is saying.
Okay, well, I was going to come back to you anyway. Maybe you can expand on the other areas of the we're supposed to talk a little bit about agriculture, and I know that's a speciality of yours, and also agricultural prices were a part of the recent rise in inflation. So perhaps you can give us your thoughts on agriculture at this time.
Well. So thank you for that, Keith. When the pandemic hit Jamaica in March 2020, and we began to move into this era of crisis, agriculture was one of those industries that continued in those initial stages to perform relatively well, because while tourism was very hard hit initially, particularly in the first quarters of the crisis last year, that June quarter, because we had some shutdown of the economy in April, May. While tourism was hard hit, a lot of the ramping up of agricultural produce that would feed into the tourism sector. As tourism was hard hit, that was now diverted to the local market. And so I think that the government and private sector partners sort of scrambled to ensure farmers markets and a lot of the produce that was already in the field coming out, anticipating normal demand in tourism. As demand in tourism fell, a lot of that agricultural produce, thankfully, were consumed by our local consumers. And so you saw agriculture doing well in those initial stages. But unfortunately, as we got into August, September, we saw some drought conditions beginning to impact. And so agriculture typically has been vulnerable in terms of, in the sense of climate impacts. The good news is that there's been a steady build out in agriculture of infusing greater what we call climate smart agricultural practices. There have been general build out in productive capacity with the assistance of the Ministry of Agriculture, rather different ones to help farmers in specific areas. We've tried, the sort of satellite approaches where we'll have clusters around, the mother farm concept that you would see in broiler meat production and in the chicken farming, and where small farmers could feed into that mechanism. We've seen storage facilities being put in place. We have ongoing now in the western end of the island, irrigation facilities, and also in Clarendon, South Clarendon, some irrigation facilities that's designed to help to improve the supply side in terms of the agriculture on the overall production equation. So we are seeing a general build out in the sector, which is promising. So as we are seeing where drought conditions would historically impact the sector, we are seeing measures to mitigate that impact through the increased implementation of irrigation facilities. And so that's very important. And then, of course, the ongoing program of establishing greater linkages with the tourism sector, with linkages with tourism and agriculture and manufacturing. I think that is continuing to bear fruit as we continue to roll it out. So quite a bit, Keith, for agriculture, very promising. I think we've seen where our challenge of trying to scale up, we have seen in different ways now we are achieving greater levels of scale, where we've been said Jamaica is a country of samples, and boy, people love our agricultural produce, they love the taste, the flavor, but we need to scale up. And we are seeing programs on the way in that. And so in the gastronomy leg of the linkages program with tourism, we are seeing more where our local chefs and the hotels are taking on even greater supplies of local produce in agriculture. So we have a lot to be optimistic about. And as we continue with this overall and greater focus on climate and climate response and building resilience as a country, we are seeing that find its greater way into the agricultural sector, and that's very promising for the country.
I don't know, John, do you want to add anything on this sort of link between agriculture and manufacturing? I know you're probably, whilst you may not be heavily involved in it directly, you are involved in the tea business, and I'm sure you have an idea of what's happening locally in certain of these areas.
Yeah, I don't have the expertise that it seems Dr. Henry has, or that great love for agriculture. But there is certainly a drive and a direction being provided by the government to strengthen the linkage between agriculture and tourism. And of course, there is a strong demand from the manufacturing sector for items that can be grown locally. And we are beginning to see increased production through some of these initiatives that the government has started. And they have some ideas for major growth in terms of exportable products like mangoes and peppers and akis and so on, that are being, the land is being set aside for those things that actually can be exported on their own. But from the manufacturing sector, we are getting more and more items from the local agriculture sector, and that's a good thing. We're beginning to see the agriculture sector showing more interest in it. Certainly business persons are showing more interest in it, and so on. And we see a reawakening in that area.
Okay, thanks very much, John. I don't know, Wayne, if you want to give us a bit of more of an overview on why you're positive on our outlook going forward. I know that kind of is a prelude to your planned mid-November presentation on our future outlook. but perhaps you can just give us your overview of why you're positive and what you're positive about.
So thank you, Keith. We, as you know, as a country, we've done quite a bit of assessments, formal studies, assessments, and even beyond that, as persons like John Mahfood, practitioners, real players and stakeholders over the years would have the experience to share thoughts of what have been the contributing factors to some of the challenges we've seen in Jamaica. And over time, we've said, well, one was the need for greater macroeconomic stability. We've said the need for greater competitiveness in the business industry. We've seen, the need for, you said the need for more diversification to tackle, crime, different priorities that we've established as a country. And I think over time, we have been making progress in a number of these measures. And sure, we still have a ways to go, but particularly as we look at, initially we use in the context of the Competitiveness Council, the National NCC, we use the rubric of doing business that the World Bank had established, with some 10 indicators of business competitiveness. And we looked at how easy it would be to start a business, the ease of trading across borders, how easy it would be to pay taxes. And we used that framework, and we began to enact and put in place, implement a number of measures that we began to see some significant progress and increases in the ease and speed of doing business, some of the reforms in our taxation system, the stronger macroeconomic framework, reduction of debt, the entrenchment of fiscal discipline. So a lot of and we're saying that's protected for the most part by law, by legislation, which makes it very difficult if you're going to revert to some of those bad practices, if you will, or the bad framework of the past. And so that is part of what we're seeing that would drive some of the optimism. As I said before, a lot of the build out in areas of trying to get better utilization, capacity utilization. We're seeing some refurbishing, modernization in some industries, alumina and mining, quarrying. We are seeing with some partners where we are trying to modernize equipment. We are trying to build out facilities. We are positioned in the country where we still have as a goal to capitalize in our geographic location in terms of logistics, as John spoke about, as the shipping lanes and where Jamaica is located and the advantages that can accrue to us. And we've had a program and programs really to build out, whether it's the deepening of the harbor, whether it's establishing and strengthening our port facilities, many things underway. And again, while you say we know there's where we still have, there's a way to go. I explain it as our agency PIOG as a guardian, if you will, where we monitor and report on the implementation of Vision 2030, or National Development Plan. It's a long-term plan, but we measure it in bite sizes. We have these 3-year medium-term frameworks where we ensure that the plan remains relevant, that the indicators are being monitored and are updated, that the priorities of the government and private sector, as there's that sort of alignment, we are international partners that support us, that their programs are aligned to our national priorities in the context of a Vision 2030. And as we look at growth going forward for the economy in the context of our long-term plan, then we have some things in place that we are pursuing. We say one is pursuing greater macro, to build on the macroeconomic stability, that foundation that we've put in place. We think that's very important. We are looking at greater levels of human capital development. We are seeing a program now to build capacity in the public sector with some of the reforms we are seeing in the public sector transformation. Very important that we increase efficiency in the public sector to partner with the private sector as we together move to build forward stronger. We look at some of the build out in infrastructure in Jamaica that has been ongoing. The construction industry had been another industry that had been doing relatively well, even despite the pandemic pandemic, because activities had been ongoing in residential and as well as non-residential activities, road works, a lot of the build out there we've seen. So there's reason, Keith, John, for the optimism we are seeing, that a number of things, and we have to keep focused. So as we look at, we need to do more in terms of the build out of the digital economy, but we've seen a lot of partnership around some early shoots and early wins that we've been seeing there in terms of building out of our broadband backbone and the network. So quite a few things, and I think looking forward as we continue to partner, because no one entity, no one hand can clap in Jamaica, we say, as we move together, we remain optimistic as we focus on the headwinds of climate impacts, and we need to continue to build resilience. So there's a lot of things we can say, but we have reason for that optimism, and we continue to see how best we mitigate those areas of downside that would represent downside risk, and to mitigate those as we move forward as a country.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Wayne. I think we'll probably have time for one more round after this question. So John, maybe you can just tell us what you think is the most positive things that you see going on for the future outlook for Jamaica's economy.
I think that, when we started this discussion today, we talked about the investment in the reform, the economic reforms that Jamaica has been on for the past 10 years. That has laid the groundwork and the foundation for where we are now. Since independence in '62, we have had many different experiments with socialism, with capitalism, many isms that did not translate into significant growth in Jamaica, to the point where our debt to equity ratio, the debt to GDP was very, very high. And so both political parties started on a sustained program of getting that down and stabilizing the economy and fiscal prudence. And so 10 years later, we were able to get through the worst of the COVID. And when you look at the pillars of the economy that we talked about, whether it is tourism, manufacturing, BPO, agriculture, finance, there is a level of optimism, there is a level of efficiency in these organizations, in these sectors, that indicate that we are going to continue that growth path for the foreseeable future. And the country has made the sacrifices to get us here. And I expect for the first time since our independence, we will going to see a gradual increase in the productivity, in the per capita income, and in the sustained economic growth. So it's not one thing, it's a combination of all the things that people have sacrificed to get us to a position where Jamaica will start to grow and become one of the leading economies in the Caribbean.
Maybe, John, you can just expand quickly on that productivity point and also the capital access point from the junior stock market, because I think the two are linked.
Yeah, I think, again, when you look back at some of the inhibiting factors on the economy, was the drive to, one of the things we faced was a very high interest rate policy in the past that took the interest rates very high and made it difficult to start businesses and to upgrade your businesses. And back in 2010, the authorities started a junior stock exchange, which allowed small and medium-sized businesses to become part of the exchange. And I think it's some 40 odd companies now that are on that exchange. And one of the things we saw, Pete, is that there has been a transformation of the companies on the junior stock exchange that bodes well for the rest of the industries in Jamaica, where the companies have, by the fact of being on the exchange, small and medium-sized family companies, transformed the way that they do business, their strategic planning. And we have seen companies that have grown 10, 15-fold in the last 10 years. And my expectation is that there are still a number of companies, maybe 40 or 50. I hope that in another, say, 3 or 4 years, we'll have 100 companies on the junior stock exchange. And what that has done is reduce the reliance on debt, on borrowings, and as I said, transform these companies. So those are things that bode well for the government, for the sector, and for the economy, and have given us confidence that companies that look at their business seriously, even family companies, can grow. And we have seen also in the last 2 years significant money being raised on both the main and the junior stock exchange, which are being put into productive use. And I believe the stock market is going to be one of the key drivers in the future.
Okay, Wayne, thank you very much, John. That was very informative. Wayne, maybe you can give us sort of, if you have one message or a couple of messages for international investors based on Jamaica's economic situation now, what would that be?
That Jamaica has been open for business. We have been demonstrating now those persons who are evidence-based and sort of results and performance-based. We've demonstrated over the past number of years a commitment to macroeconomic stability and fiscal discipline. As John highlighted, some of our challenges historically had been facilitated, brought about, exacerbated by these, and we've seen the improvements in the Jamaican economy. We have seen that we are on the public sector side, the government side, guiding policy, where policy matters in creating an enabling environment for business and investment. We are moving ahead in accordance with our long-term national goals embedded in our Vision 2030 Jamaica, our National Development Plan, to move Jamaica to become a more technology-enabled society, and we are seeing moves in that direction. We've been ensuring, in keeping with our sustainable development goals that the world has bought into and are aligning their country structures to, that as we are doing and progressing, we are careful to not leave anyone behind. And so we have a robust social protection mechanism that we continue to review. Over the time of the pandemic, we've expanded and strengthened in areas. So we are serious, and we are people-centered, even as we move the country, seek to move the country forward. And I think it's important to say that, because a number of our investors are more socially conscious and not just about money, but social returns. How are people, and what is the effect and the benefit from a you say from a social responsibility standpoint. And so Jamaica has been demonstrating that, and I think that's a key message I'd want to leave. That we are open for business. We have many opportunities, emerging opportunities in the blue and green economies. We have a lot on the table in terms of trying to do more with technology and infuse our digitalization agenda. So many opportunities exist for Jamaica, and we are seeing those improvements as John, the expert here in terms of private sector involvement, can tell you. So we have a ways to go, but we are committed as we work together and as we remain focused and transparent in progressing and building forward stronger.
Okay, John, and the same question for you. If you had one or two key messages for international investors, what would it be? Or what would they be?
Well, I think that it's as Dr. Henry said, it's the environment here is a very positive one, open to investors, open to businesses of various natures. We didn't talk a lot about the green side of it, the solar and wind turbine, wind power, but Jamaica and individual companies are certainly transforming themselves in terms of investment in solar energy and wind turbines and so on. And the country itself is very open to the investment in the clean economy. And that's an area that I believe that outsiders investors can look at. But it's really the entire atmosphere that exists where everything is open, strong, foreign exchange reserves, balanced economy. It is the type of country where you can invest and look beyond just the domestic market, but as an opportunity to re-export. That would be, for instance, in the BPO sector. So wherever your particular expertise is as an investor, you can come into this market with the confidence that you are looking at an expanding market and one that is open to investors.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think that's probably the time, the 45 minutes that we have. So I'd just like to thank you all. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think we've given a good overview of what's happening in Jamaica. All right, thanks very much, John, Wayne, for your presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.